Hi, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I was thinking about today. I went on a little bit of a walk around my neighborhood, and I definitely noticed that I can see a bunch of signs of spring. There are flowers blooming. I have some trees in my yard that have flower buds, and new leaves are coming out. I have been working in my greenhouse. I have some seeds going and lots of signs of spring. And so I thought it was also the perfect time for us to talk about birds and start our study of birds because in the springtime we start to see a lot more birds. Some of us just celebrated Easter and it has a big egg theme, which birds are not the only animals that reproduce with eggs, but they're the kind that we use for our Easter celebrations. And also, we're going to start talking about seeds soon. And one thing that is a major food source for a lot of different types of birds are seeds. So, let's see if we can get this new technology rolling, and we will talk about the parts of birds. So if you think about it, we can almost all of us can picture a bird in our mind. So let's just take a minute and think about any bird that you can picture right now. I started off by picturing some of the birds that I see on my walk in my neighborhood, like a robin or a sparrow. Um, I also get very excited when I see a large bird, like a hawk, flying around the neighborhood. So I pictured one of those for a minute, and then I pictured a chicken. And oh, I just remembered that they have large ostriches and emus at the zoo, which are also birds. And if we're talking about the zoo, maybe you thought about penguins or some of the tropical birds that came from the zoo program to visit us at our school. So lots and lots of different kinds of birds. But today we're going to talk about some things that they all have in common. So we are going to talk about this little yellow bird right here, just kind of a regular bird we're going to use to symbolize what most birds have in common. We know not every bird is the same. We just thought about a lot of different kinds of birds, but what most birds have in common, we're going to talk about their parts and what makes them special and what makes them birds. We know the bird is an animal. It's in our animal kingdom that we've been studying. A bird has what covering its skin? Feathers, and that's something that other animals do not have. And it also lays eggs that have hard shells. So that is one thing that is slightly different from our reptiles, or our fish, or our amphibians, which also lay eggs. They tend to have softer shells, but because the bird is definitely laying eggs on land in nests, they tend to have hard shells. Obviously, a very important part of every animal is the bird's head. And the head is very important for lots of reasons. It's the part that controls the rest of the body and the functions. But something special about birds and their heads, if you've ever watched maybe an owl at the zoo, their heads are very agile is the word that we're going to use, but it can turn very farther. I can look about this far over my shoulder before I have to turn my body, but a bird's head can sit with its body forward and turn its head very, very far to look in all directions. So we're going to use that word again, agile, for the bird's head. Now, the head is also home to a lot of other very important parts of the bird. One of those are its eyes. And if you notice, look at this bird here, and what do you notice about this bird's eyes? Now, when you look at me, both of my eyes are in the very front of my head, and they look forward together at the same time. But this bird, if you'll notice, their eyes are placed more to the sides of their head, and that's how most birds have their eyes, a little bit more on either side of the head. And the bird can see better to the right and to the left than they can actually straight in front of them. And one of the reasons that that is common in an animal is if they are prey animals. So a lot of the birds that eat things like seeds and nuts and insects have their eyes on the side of their head so they can be looking out for predators. If you will picture in your mind a bird that's more predatory, like a hawk or an eagle, their eyes tend to move a little bit closer to the front. Or an owl, think about an owl looking straight on at you. Now, the owl, even though his eyes are in the very front of his head, he still has a great range of motion. The owls are famous for being able to look almost completely behind themselves while sitting facing forward. So pretty amazing adaptation with the owls, even though their eyes are more to the front. So here we go. Those are the bird's eyes. The other thing that we really want to talk about is the bird's beak. And beaks are obviously the mouth of the bird. Think about the things that you would need to do with a mouth, and why does a bird need a beak? But the beak, yes, it is used to eat food, but the shape of the beak often depends on the kind of food that the bird is going to eat. So let's just think about that for just a minute. If your favorite food was pizza, what if your mouth was shaped specifically for one type of food for you to eat? What would a pizza mouth look like? What would a French fry mouth look like? What would a big apple mouth look like? If that was your favorite food. So birds' beaks, if we think about all the different kinds of beaks that we can picture, even just on some of the birds that we talked about, their beaks are specially shaped just for the kinds of food that they are going to eat. And if you're exploring the folder, the bird folder on Schoology, you will see there is a lesson specifically about the bird beaks because they are just so important to the bird, to their survival, and it's amazing all of the different beak types that there are out there in the world. So that is their beak. On the beak also are nostrils on either side of the beak, and it's a little bit difficult to see in this picture. It's red, it's right there. They're often very, very small holes on either side of the beak or right on top. And let's think for a minute, what do your nostrils do? Or what do they help you to do? It's very similar for birds. The nostrils are small openings on the top of the bird's beak, and nostrils let in air and let out air for breathing. And the birds, let's think, what do we think? Do birds use lungs like people and reptiles, or do they use gills like fish? What do we know? Well, we definitely know that gills are used for filtering oxygen out of the water. And since most of our birds spend most of their time on land, that's right, the birds use lungs for breathing. And so that nostril is part of their special beak. So far we're talking about birds. Their head is obviously very important in the way that it is shaped and made, and the way they can use it is very important to them for eating and survival. On their head, also, the eyes are very specifically placed on different kinds of birds. The beak has special adaptations to help them eat, and part of the beak are the nostrils, which is part of their respiratory system, helping them to use their lungs to breathe. If we're moving away from the head and we're going to talk about the body of the bird, this very important part in the front here is called the breast. And a lot of us will know you eat a chicken breast. This is the part in the front of the bird that you are eating. It tends to be the largest part of the bird. Obviously, it's going to house some organs behind there. But if you'll notice on this bird, and most birds who fly, the breast of the bird and the bones inside are slightly pointed forward. And I want us to think about, I thought it was so interesting. Remember when we talked about a fish, and if the front of a fish was shaped flat or even kind of rounded, how difficult that might be and how much water would be displaced as the fish moved through the water. It would make it hard for them to move. So we said a fish has a tapered, smaller at the front, wedge-like head, most fish. Well, most birds also, as they're flying, they have a tapered breastbone, which helps them, similar to the fish that moves through water, the bird actually has to move through air. If you've ever rolled your car window down while you're driving and even just stuck your fingertips out, you can feel the air and how much pressure when you're moving pushes against your fingers. Well, the birds are fighting that constantly to stay in the air. So their body dynamics, the way they're shaped, with a more pointed or tapered breastbone, actually helps them to move through the air. And think for a minute, try to picture in your mind a chicken that you might eat, or a large ostrich. These birds that are less likely to fly have developed and tend to have a flatter chest plate, a flatter breastbone in there, because they don't need to be cutting through the air like some of our flighted birds. So that is a very important part of their body adaptation. Another part that we know is very specialized to birds. There are some other creatures that have wing-like structures, but it's very, very specialized to birds that birds have wings. We could compare them to the forelimbs of a mammal or the front legs of an amphibian or a reptile, but birds are specialized usually for flying. For birds who get around by flying, obviously their wings are very, very important. There is also in our Schoology bird folder, as you're exploring there is a video that answers the question, what do penguins use their wings for? They have wings up on top, but we know that they are not flying. So how do penguins use their wings? And so that's kind of an interesting video to watch. But most birds who are flight birds, who are flying birds, will use their wings for flight and movement. And the wings are covered in feathers, just like most of the rest of the bird's body. But parts of the wings and parts of their feathers that a bird has actually have very specific names. And this is one of my favorite ones. These are called the remiges. Remiges. And if anyone would like to inform me about a better way to say that word, I am open to it. But I've always heard it and read it as remiges. And so think about, what would these largest parts of the wings, the parts at the ends, the tips of the wings, what do you think that those would be used for? If you said that they are the large flight feathers of the wings, then you are correct. They actually help keep the birds stable while they're in the air. They're used for steering and for braking. If you've ever seen a photograph, some people have taken high-speed photographs of a bird coming in and maybe deciding at the last minute to change direction, and they'll unfold those big remiges at the end and try to brake in midair and have a stop. So those remiges are very important for controlling their flight. Another very important group of feathers, it's not exactly a wing, but on most birds, especially especially birds who fly, are these tail feathers here. And they actually, our work and our information say that they help to slow down when they're in flight, which again, if you've seen any of those high-speed photographs of a bird braking or slowing down in flight, you will definitely know or notice that their tail has come out. and is helping with that job. But think about maybe a bird like a peacock. We know that tail feathers can also have other specialized uses in perhaps a mating dance or a display, or to communicate something to other birds. So tail feathers are also very, very important part of the bird. And the last thing that we're going to talk about today as a part of the bird, let me make sure I've got all of the room that I need here. This is a big work we're doing. And I do have, if you'd like to replicate this work, I do have a printable copy that you can print and cut out and challenge yourself to do your own parts of the bird layout. And that's available in the Schoology folder on birds. And honestly, I would love to see that. I would love to see that. Whatever work you do, if you are printing something, coloring it, doing a field guide, researching birds, I would love, love, love to see all of that work. So the last part that we're going to talk about today is a very interesting part of the bird, similar to the beak, except for at the opposite end, and that is the feet of the bird. And if you can see here, I'm so sorry, my camera's a little bit blurry. You can see here, these feet are gripping onto this branch. So this is a bird who flies, and they've come into land, and the feet actually help them to grip onto the branch here. And that's very important. But think about, for a moment, picture in your mind, what do duck feet look like? If you're picturing a flat, webbed foot, you are correct. And so thinking about that, if you were going to swim, okay, because these are for mostly flighted birds. Ducks are mostly swimming birds. They obviously can walk on the land, but they do a lot of swimming. And so if you are swimming, you can even try this at home. If you have a sink full of water or a bucket full of water, and you move your fingers through like this, you don't scoop a lot of water. You're not going to move very far. But if you have something that makes your hand to be webbed and covers those spaces in between the bones, then scoop the water, you can see how a webbed foot would help you to swim. Similar to how we talked about some of our amphibians, some of our frogs who are swimmers have developed the webbed feet to help them to be great swimmers. So the feet of birds are very, very important. Some interesting facts about them: they can be used for standing, clinging, swimming, wading, tearing, or perching on a branch. The bird stands only on its toes. So if when we look a little bit later at the skeleton of a bird, we'll see that the bird is standing only on its toes, and the weight of the body rests on a single toe, the middle toe. Now that's pretty amazing. If you think about, you are seeing pigeons land or robins in your yard, that they're standing on a single toe. That in itself is amazing. But then take that and think about an ostrich and how large an ostrich is, taller than you, taller than me, and with such a large body and fast runners, and they support all of that weight and do all that fast running on a single middle toe. The feet of birds becomes incredibly amazing. So let's take one last look. We'll just review some of the last parts of the body of the bird, and then I will let you explore your birds folder. So on our bird, very important, we said the breast part of the bird is here in the front, and it is modified for flight or flightless birds. The wings are obviously very important to birds, especially if they are flying. The remiges are the long, large flight feathers of the bird, which helps to steer and brake and be stable in the air. The tail feathers also help with slowing and communication between birds. And the feet, which are specialized, similar to the beak, depending on how your bird needs to move around in the world. So hopefully we've learned a little bit more about the parts of the bird, and feel free, get onto Schoology and start exploring your bird folder. Thanks!